The sky could kill you even when nothing hit your aircraft. That was the fear that kept RAF crews awake through 1940 and 1941. The knowledge that German flak wasn't about aim. It was about math. Any shell exploding within 70 yards threw thousands of steel fragments at speeds over 2,000 feet per second. The Luftwaffe had turned the air into a deadly equation, and the house always won. By mid-1940, Bomber Command was learning this lesson the hard way. Germany had planted nearly 2,000 heavy anti-aircraft guns across occupied Europe, mostly the famous 88mm Flak 36 and 37. These weren't old World War I leftovers. They were advanced weapons connected to mechanical computers that measured wind, altitude, bomber speed, and shell travel time. A trained German crew could fire 15 to 20 shells a minute, each time to explode at a precise height. They didn't try to shoot at a bomber. They created kill zones. The numbers told the truth. On the Cologne raid of August 12, 1941, flak caused 68% of all RAF losses. Fighters took the rest. A Lancaster bomber, 69 feet long, 102 feet across, was a massive, slow-moving target. At only 180 to 200 miles per hour during a bombing run, flying straight and level, it gave German predictors about 30 seconds to calculate a perfect solution. 30 seconds was forever, and the German system was even deadlier than crews imagined. Their doctrine used barrage fire, multiple batteries filling the sky with exploding spheres 140 yards wide. Over the Ruhr alone, more than 1,000 heavy guns guarded Germany's industrial heart. With dozens of batteries firing at once, the air became a minefield you couldn't see until metal was already ripping through your aircraft. When Air Marshal Arthur Harris took command in February 1942, he inherited an impossible math problem. Wellington, Stirling, and Halifax bombers simply could not survive daylight raids. The Augsburg attack on April 17, 1942, proved it beyond doubt. 12 Lancasters went in, 7 were lost, and several survivors were too damaged to ever fly again. A 60% loss rate in one afternoon. Bomber Command had no choice. They switched entirely to night operations. Accuracy dropped sharply, but survival rose. In the darkness, German optical trackers struggled. Predictors needed seconds of steady tracking, but searchlights couldn't always hold a bomber long enough. Night raids reduced losses to roughly 3 to 5% per mission. Still terrible over a 30-mission tour, but survivable. Yet everyone knew this shift was a kind of defeat. Night bombing meant wide-area destruction instead of true precision. It meant 1,000 bomber raids where dozens should have been enough. Germany had effectively won the daylight skies through engineering and mathematics. Unless someone could change the equation. That someone was climbing into a wooden prototype at the Hatfield Aerodrome, a machine about to prove that pure speed could beat statistics. The de Havilland Mosquito should never have worked. That was the Air Ministry's opinion in 1938 when Geoffrey de Havilland proposed it. A bomber made mostly of wood, plywood and balsa. Seemed like desperate thinking from a company short on aluminum. Fighter Command wanted Spitfires. Bomber Command wanted 4-engine giants. No one wanted a strange wooden twin-engine design that looked more like high-end furniture than a frontline aircraft. German intelligence agreed. Early reports in 1941 mocked it as the Holes bomber, the wooden bomber. Others called it the furniture bomber. The tone was not just dismissive, almost insulting. Germany built the finest all-metal aircraft in Europe. Britain, it seemed, was gluing together plywood. The mockery grew louder when German analysts obtained performance details in early 1942. The Mosquito bomber had no defensive guns, no turrets, no armor, and it carried barely 3,000 pounds of bombs, only 1/5 of a Lancaster's load. Even worse, it used 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines that could have powered 2 Spitfires instead. To the Germans, the design confirmed everything their propaganda said about Britain's weakness. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't believe, was what those design choices truly meant. By removing defensive guns and the crew needed to operate them, de Havilland cut almost 2,000 pounds of weight. By using wood instead of aluminum, he saved precious metal while creating an airframe that was surprisingly light, incredibly strong, and faster than anything they imagined. And now, the wooden aircraft that nobody wanted was about to rewrite the rules of the air war. Speed had changed the equation, but now someone had to prove it. The Mosquito's wooden body wasn't just light. Its plywood, balsa, sandwich construction absorbed damage better than aluminum. Shells that tore metal bombers apart often passed straight through a Mosquito without exploding. But even that wasn't the real surprise. The real miracle was speed. In February 1941, the prototype DK-290 hit 390 miles per hour, faster than most fighters in service. When the Mosquito Mark V joined 105 Squadron later that year, it could cruise at about 380 miles per hour at altitude. That made it quicker than the Bf-109F, faster than the early FW-190s, and far beyond anything German analysts believed a wooden bomber could achieve. German pilots encountering the Mosquito in early 1942 were stunned. The bomber they were ordered to intercept simply outran them. Even 109s diving with built-up speed could barely close the gap, and once they leveled out, the Mosquito vanished. The FW-190, Germany's top fighter, could only match the Mosquito if it already had a perfect attack angle and precious seconds of warning. German intelligence kept updating their estimates, and every time they revised the numbers up, the Mosquito still outperformed them. The furniture bomber was turning into a nightmare, an aircraft that survived not by fighting, but by being too fast to catch. But raw speed wasn't enough. Someone needed to prove the Mosquito could use that speed where German flak was deadliest. Someone had to fly into defended airspace at a height so low the math collapsed for the gunners. That task fell to Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. He wasn't just Britain's chief test pilot. He was the son of the man who had gambled his company's future on the wooden bomber. In January 1942, he received a mission that was both technical challenge and family responsibility. Bomber Command believed in heavy aircraft and big bomb loads. Harris wanted proof, real witness proof, that speed could defeat flak at the altitudes where most RAF crews died. The test sounded simple on paper. Fly a Mosquito into defended airspace at under 200 feet, at maximum speed, long enough to make German fire control calculations impossible. Not theoretically impossible, mathematically impossible in the real world. If he failed, Mosquito production could be halted. Factories at Hatfield, Leavesden, and Salisbury stood on the line. So did thousands of workers, and the entire fast bomber doctrine Britain was betting on. Geoffrey was 30, slight, intense, and frighteningly calm, traits that made ground crews uneasy when they saw him walking toward an aircraft. He had more hours in prototype Mosquitoes than anyone alive. He knew every vibration, every quirk in its wooden frame, often better than the engineers who designed it. The mission's risks were extreme. German 88s could depress their barrels to hit targets as low as 500 feet. Under 200 feet, their optical trackers struggled, but only if the aircraft stayed above 350 miles per hour. Slower, and the guns could adjust. Faster, and the Mosquito entered an air regime few pilots had ever tested. The demonstration also had to be recorded, timed, witnessed, and repeatable. It had to be done in a combat-weight aircraft, not a stripped test machine. And at 380 miles per hour and 200 feet, the math was brutal. You traveled roughly 110 yards every second. Any obstacle, wind shear, or mechanical fault left you with fractions of a second to react. The Mosquito's wooden wings flexed more than metal ones. Engineers believed they would hold, but no one had pushed them this hard, this low, for this long. So Geoffrey prepared. For weeks in February 1942, he swept across the Hertfordshire countryside in a series of increasingly dangerous low-level runs, each one lower, each one faster, until he could feel exactly how the Mosquito behaved when the ground filled his windscreen and he could count individual sheep as they flashed beneath him. He was nearly ready to prove that speed could do what armor and guns could not. Geoffrey hadn't spent February just practicing low flight. He'd been studying the enemy. He examined German flak doctrine, gun traverse speeds, and how long their mechanical computers needed to calculate a firing solution. He ran his own math, fuel burn at full power, how a loaded bomb bay changed handling, and what escape routes he'd take if something went horribly wrong. By the end of the month, everything came down to one moment. He would either prove his father's dream, or destroy it in front of the Air Ministry. February 25, 1942 arrived cold and clear over Hampshire. Perfect weather for either a career-ending disaster or a revolution in air warfare. Just after 8 a.m., Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. climbed into Mosquito W4050 at Hatfield. Within 2 hours, he would either silence the skeptics or give them all the proof they needed to cancel Mosquito production entirely. A delegation of senior bomber command officers waited 30 miles away at RAF Farnborough. Some had already drafted reports recommending the Mosquito be abandoned. Jeffrey had spent 11 months preparing for this. Not only flying dozens of low-level rehearsals, but carefully arranging an official, controlled test, photographed, timed, and witnessed by multiple observers. Farnborough offered everything: exact timing equipment, a long approach corridor, and enough space to make the results undeniable. W-4050 lifted off at 8:43. He climbed to 3,000 feet and ran through checks. The plane carried combat-weight fuel, standard military engine settings, and ballast simulating a full bomb load. Nothing was lightened. Nothing was modified. This was a frontline Mosquito. He began his approach from 5 miles north, descending steadily as his speed climbed past 300 miles per hour. Through 1,000 feet at 340 miles per hour, the countryside blurred into streaks of brown and green. At 500 feet, he leveled out, building to 370 miles per hour, then dipped the nose again. He shot toward Farnborough's northern boundary at 20 feet. The observers heard him before they saw him. 2 Merlins screaming at full power, rattling windows in the control tower. Then the Mosquito appeared, impossibly low and impossibly fast, clearing the grass by what looked like inches. Ground crews later swore they could feel the propeller wash as he passed. He held that razor-thin altitude for nearly 2 miles across the airfield. Stopwatches recorded 19 seconds from one boundary to the other. Average speed, 379 miles per hour. Average altitude, 22 feet. He never drifted more than 5 feet up or down, even through turbulence rough enough to make most pilots pull away. The Mosquito's wooden wings bent visibly under the load, flexing upward by several feet, causing more than one watching engineer to turn pale. Jeffrey climbed out, banked hard, and set up for a second run. 8:56, second pass, 23 feet, over 380 miles per hour. 9:01, third pass, including a 4G climbing turn to demonstrate combat maneuver limits. The group captains stopped writing. They simply watched, because what they were seeing rewrote bombing doctrine. A German 88mm crew would have roughly 4.7 seconds from first sight to losing a target moving like that. Their fire control predictor needed 6 seconds, minimum, to generate a firing solution. The math didn't merely favor the Mosquito. It made hitting it impossible. Jeffrey hadn't just beaten the gun. He'd beaten the entire German Flak system, the best mechanical computation 1940s engineering could build. An 88mm gun fired a 20-pound shell at nearly 2,700 feet per second, but once that shell climbed toward altitude, it bled speed rapidly. At 2,000 feet, it might be down to around 1,400 feet per second, and it took about 4 seconds to get there. During those 4 seconds, the bomber was no longer where the gun crew aimed. That's why Germany used the Kommandozierat 40 predictor, an electromechanical computer the size of a desk. It took in target altitude, bearing, speed, wind, rate of climb, and more, then transmitted the firing solution to the gun servos. But each step took time. A 2 seconds to lock the target with optical rangefinders. A 3 seconds of tracking to calculate direction and velocity. A 1 to 2 seconds for the gun to traverse and elevate into firing position. Even a highly trained crew needed 5 to 7 seconds total. Many needed 8 to 10. A Mosquito at 20 feet didn't give them that time. At low level, an 88 could only engage within roughly 1,200 yards. Beyond that, the gun literally aimed into the ground. And 1,200 yards at 300 plus mph meant the Mosquito was exposed for just 5 to 6 seconds, total. In reality, because the aircraft appeared suddenly at close range, crews often had 3 seconds or less. 3 seconds to track, to calculate, to aim, to fire. It couldn't be done. Jeffrey had shown, in front of witnesses, that speed could beat the entire German air defense network. And the Mosquito's triumph at Eindhoven left no room for doubt. Harris had his proof. Speed, precision, and low-level tactics could outperform massed night raids. Even before the formal reports reached his desk, Bomber Command began shaping new orders. The aircraft de Havilland had demonstrated only weeks earlier was now redefining daylight operations. Operation Oyster became the opening move. The Phillips Works at Eindhoven, vital for German radar valves and deep inside occupied territory, was chosen to prove that the Mosquito could hit what heavy bombers could only threaten. Harris assigned the task to 105 and 139 squadrons, with Ventura bombers supplementing the strike. Flight Lieutenant Ted Sismore received his briefing on December 4, 1942. The plan was brutally simple: cross the North Sea at wave-top height, enter Holland near the Scheldt estuary, and navigate by roads and rail lines while never rising above 100 feet. Speed was survival. Approach Eindhoven at maximum power, drop bombs, and escape before German gunners could compute a single accurate solution. Their exposure time over defended territory, just 12 minutes. The morning of December 6th brought clear skies and light winds, ideal for the kind of flying only the Mosquito could attempt. 14 aircraft lifted from RAF Marham and Horsham St. Faith, formed over the Wash, and skimmed across the sea. German radar spotted them briefly at 12:28, then lost them. The wooden airframes and extreme low-level routing rendered the formations nearly invisible. Sismore's group reached Eindhoven at 12:30, climbing only to 400 feet to release their bombs. German batteries erupted at once but were already too late. In barely 90 seconds, 56 500-pound bombs tore through the valve production halls and surrounding workshops. Reconnaissance later confirmed the factory's main output reduced by roughly 75%, with repairs dragging on for 9 months. A single daylight blow doing more targeted damage than entire heavy bomber streams had managed at night. All 14 Mosquitoes escaped before fighters arrived. Only one, DZ-414, took light flak damage but returned safely. The slower Venturas behind them suffered from German fighters, yet the Mosquito force was already crossing back over the Dutch coast when those combats began. For Harris, the conclusion was unmistakable. The Wooden Wonder had changed the rules of bombing, and the next target would test those rules to the absolute limit. Berlin, never touched by daylight attack, lay far beyond the reach of escorted bombers and shielded by dense flak and fighter belts. Göring had repeatedly boasted that no enemy aircraft would ever bomb the capital in daylight under his command. Harris intended to break that promise in the most humiliating way possible. On January 27, 1943, Squadron Leader Bob Reynolds received orders for a mission as audacious as any in RAF history. 3 Mosquitoes, only 3, would strike Berlin on the morning of January 30th, precisely as Göring opened a major speech marking the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power. While Germany listened to his claims of air defense supremacy, the RAF would drop bombs on his capital. Reynolds, Squadron Leader Darling, and Flight Lieutenant Archie Gilchrist lifted off from Marham at 10:30 on the appointed day, each aircraft carrying 4 500-pound bombs. They crossed the North Sea at 50 feet, entered Germany near Cuxhaven, and threaded their way southeast at treetop height, too low and too fast for radar to track. At exactly noon, as Göring spoke in the Air Ministry, the Mosquitoes burst through Berlin's northeastern defenses. They climbed just enough for their bomb aimers to work, around 1,500 feet, then ran in at high speed. Flak gunners fired wildly, but the aircraft were already releasing their loads. Reynolds struck first, followed seconds later by Darling and Gilchrist. The blasts shook central Berlin and cut the broadcast mid-speech. Alarms wailed across a city that believed daylight attack impossible. The Mosquitoes dived back to low level and turned northwest at full throttle. Fighters scrambled from nearby airfields but never closed the distance. By the time the Luftwaffe reached altitude, the raiders were dozens of miles away and accelerating. Flak along the escape route burst behind empty air. At 13:35, the 3 aircraft landed back at Marham, unscathed, having accomplished in 1 hour what the Luftwaffe had sworn could never happen. And Berlin's humiliation echoed far beyond the immediate blast. Göring resumed his speech 15 minutes later, but the damage, political and psychological, was irreversible. Daylight bombing of the capital had been declared impossible by the Reichsmarschall himself, yet 3 wooden aircraft built from plywood and glue had proved otherwise. German radio traffic that afternoon crackled with disbelief as officials demanded explanations for how outdated British bombers had penetrated a fortress everyone assumed untouchable. Engineers understood immediately what the attack meant. The Mosquito had exposed a fatal weakness in Germany's defensive system. Throughout 1943, they rushed to fix it. Rheinmetall Borsig developed faster traversing gun mounts. Krupp experimented with electronic predictors. Technical divisions tested proximity-fused shells to remove the need for precise altitude calculations. None solved the problem. The guns improved. The predictors improved. But the physics didn't change. Even the upgraded Flak 3741st mount, entering service mid-1943 and capable of 40% faster traverse, barely mattered. Against a Mosquito tearing across the horizon at nearly 400 miles per hour and flying only feet above the ground, shaving half a second off aiming time was meaningless. Predictors still needed a stable track. Shells still needed seconds to reach altitude. The Mosquito still crossed more than 1,000 yards in the time it took a gun crew to react. Proximity fuses, Germany's most advanced attempt at a technical solution, fared no better. The Granitwich acoustic fuse, tested through late 1943, relied on tiny microphones to sense engine noise and detonate near aircraft. The concept was ingenious, but fragile. Early trials saw shells exploding too far away, or immediately after firing when the microphones picked up the gun's own blast. After months of revisions, engineers finally produced a reliable fuse by April 1944, one that detonated within roughly 70 yards of a target. It still couldn't hit mosquitoes. Pilots learned to spot muzzle flashes, count 2 seconds, and jerk the aircraft sideways. By the time the shell reached the predicted point, the target had shifted out of range. Fighter interception evolved as well. Germany poured hope into the Me-262 jet, capable of speeds no Allied aircraft could match. But it needed long runways, drank fuel, and couldn't operate safely at the altitudes where Mosquitoes excelled. By the time a 262 could scramble and climb, the Raiders were already over the North Sea. And when jets did engage, closing speeds left pilots barely a second or two to fire before overshooting. By late 1944, internal Luftwaffe technical papers admitted what crews already knew. No mount speed, no predictor, no fuse could overcome the fundamental time-distance problem at extreme low level. Once a target exceeded roughly 350 miles per hour near the deck, prediction-based defenses collapsed. German engineers had been defeated not by British materials, but by mathematics. The Mosquito's true armor was velocity. De Havilland's 19-second pass at Farnborough, just 22 feet above the ground, had rewritten doctrine. Within 18 months, Mosquito squadrons expanded from 2 to 26. They struck Gestapo headquarters, prison compounds, research sites, and acted as pathfinders for massive night offensives. But the aircraft's growing legacy was larger than its missions. It represented a shift in thinking. Precision and speed could achieve strategic effects once assumed to require hundreds of bombers. Bomber Command's mindset changed rapidly. In 1942, Harris built his campaign around overwhelming numbers. The 1,000 bomber raids on Cologne and Essen were meant to saturate defenses through mass. Losses were accepted because large forces could absorb attrition. The Mosquito offered a different logic entirely. Small formations hitting vital targets with minimal casualties. By mid-1943, Mosquito units executed raids that once required entire Lancaster groups. Copenhagen Shell House, Amsterdam, Amiens Prison, all struck with daylight accuracy heavy bombers could not hope to match. The Americans took notice. The USAAF, initially skeptical of speed over armor philosophy, began adapting similar ideas. The P-38 proved highly effective as a low-level precision striker in the Mediterranean. The A-26 Invader, entering service in 1944, reflected Mosquito-style design priorities. Fast, lightly armored, and built to penetrate defenses through sheer velocity. Post-war aircraft carried the concept into the jet age. Britain's English Electric Canberra, entering service in 1951, was designed as a jet-powered successor to the Mosquito: high speed, minimal defensive guns, low-level penetration. The American B-57 and the Soviet Yak-28 followed the same template. In Vietnam, F-4 Phantoms executed low-level bridge strikes using tactics any Mosquito veteran would recognize. Approach fast, deliver accurately, escape before missile batteries could lock on. The underlying equation, time to target versus time to compute a firing solution, remained intact. As defenses grew faster, strike aircraft grew even faster. The F-111 in the 1960s, able to roar at Mach 1.2 at low level, was essentially a Mosquito scaled into the supersonic era. The Panavia Tornado refined it further, using terrain-following radar to hold 50-foot altitudes at 600 miles per hour, echoing the same principle de Havilland proved in 1943. When speed erases prediction, defenses fail. The guns kept firing. The predictors kept calculating. But the targets were already gone. That lesson has never aged.